Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are facing a slew of legislative priorities. They got a lot they want to get done now that they have a House Speaker.
Among them, working to avoid, of course, a government shutdown next month. New Speaker Mike Johnson says funding for Israel will also be considered this week. President Biden is pushing for a package that also includes Ukraine.
Yeah, for more, we are joined now by CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, thank you for being here. So the GOP is expected to bring a standalone Israel bill to the House floor and to do so this week. Is it likely to pass? What might be in it?
It begins in a real fragile state, Tony, despite likely overwhelming support from members of Congress to support Israel, to support the war effort and the humanitarian needs, and this request from President Biden for several billions of dollars immediately. There's an issue. The new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, has said he may consider what they call offsets, or some means to pay for it by cutting into something else. And that is always tricky around here. When you want to cut spending on something, you're going to face some opposition. So if this is not going to be emergency aid from a blank check, if this is going to need $14.3 billion in cuts elsewhere, he's going to run into some opposition to that. And that makes it more fragile than it otherwise would be. The House returns here Wednesday, Tony and Lilia. They're going to get to this bill first, according to the new House Speaker, but I wouldn't assume immediate, instantaneous passage.
So not immediate, but in 3 weeks, the government could shut down. The date is November 17th. That's the deadline. Where are efforts to fund the government, and how is that a priority right now with so much conversation about funding these wars outside of the U.S.?
If it feels like we just went through this, it's because we just went through this. But here we are again with a November 17th deadline this time for Congress to pass some kind of bill to keep the lights on and keep the doors open. The new House Speaker voted against that last bill, the one cut on September 30th, to kick the can down the curb. He now must steward the House into doing what he opposed. What's on the table? Likely going to have to be another one of those short-term snooze button type spending bills just to keep Washington and the federal government open to fight another day. And it's some of the fiercest critics of that type of short-term spending who are telling CBS News they'd be okay with it in this context because they recognize, Lilia and Tony, they have painted the new House Speaker into the tightest of corners by burning 3 weeks of legislative time on the hot mess that was the Speaker's race. But also, it's worth noting they're going to get to passing some of the longer-term spending bills as early as Wednesday. That's going to take some time, though. That needs time to mature or age, like a fine wine. It'll take months to get that done. They'll need to do a short-term deal in November.
Scott, I want to talk for a moment, if you could, about censures and expulsions, two things that may be happening. So there might be a Republican-led effort this week to expel New York Congressman George Santos from Congress, to kick him right out. What can you tell us about that? Also, on the censure front, efforts to possibly censure Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican, and Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat.
Oh, there's like a censure arms race going on here. And yeah, 3 of them are coming right down the pike this week. They could be considered as early as midweek. Let's start with the George Santos one. It's his fellow New York Republicans who put forward an emergency measure to expel George Santos. That requires a 2/3 vote of the U.S. House. That is an enormous hill to climb, but they're going to give it a shot as early as this week. His fellow New York Republicans are sick of being asked about George Santos, sick of being associated with George Santos. They're in the same party, they're in the same geography. They want him gone. But with that narrow majority, Tony, of only 4 or 5 votes to lose on any one controversial bill, Republicans can ill afford to lose Santos's vote. That 2/3 threshold is steep. About Congresswoman Tlaib and Congresswoman Greene from Georgia, members of the opposing party want them gone for what they say were inflammatory comments made in recent weeks. This is the type of thing you don't do typically just for inflammatory comments. Censure used to be such a high bar. Now it's being invoked frequently. No indication those censure measures are going to go very far very quickly, but they may give it a try as early as this week.
All right, Scott MacFarlane. Scott, thank you very much.